Hello, 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 coaches and leaders. I have Debra Durma on with me, and we're going to talk about data. And I'm realizing that's a lot of alliteration. Duh, 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 duh. This is amazing. I love this. All right. Oh, I am a little bit of a geek for alliteration too. That might be the teacher in me. But we're going to be talking about humanizing data. I just made that up, but I feel like that's a thing that you and I believe in, that there's humans behind the data, right? And what causes people to get stressed out about it? How can we have connection, human connection throughout the whole data process of looking through it? So Deborah is like a data expert, so I'm excited to talk with her about how we can reduce stress around data, increase connection around data, right? And have like really effective and connected conversations around it. So before we jump in, first, I wanted to welcome you to the show, Deborah.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited to have this conversation. So before we jump in, I would love you to share with everyone, what is your journey in education? Where did you start and what do you do now?
So I started as a teacher, first grade and junior high, both ends.
Oh,
Then I moved
wow.
on to be a principal, worked at district office for a while. Then I worked with a grant for the Center for Data-Driven Reform. And that's where I really kind of honed in on a lot of the data strategies that I work with. And then for the past 15 years, I've been working on my own with schools,
Mhm.
working with them to help transform their school and move
I,
them to reaching their goals.
I love that. So for 15 years, last 15 years?
Yes, but I've actually
That's
been in
amazing.
education 38 years.
Yes, wow, but you've really been like, out there helping schools work with data for just really focusing on that data for 15 years. That's impressive.
Yeah, I love helping people, so it's been great to be out there with schools and helping them.
Now, why did you choose to specialize in data and helping schools understand and work better with data?
As a first year teacher, the principal that I had trained me in data strategies, and I saw the impact. And I
Mm,
took those same strategies and what she taught me to my first principalship, saw the impact again. We went from like 33% of the kids at grade level to 60% at grade level. And I knew that they worked. So it just kind of it's been a natural journey for me based on that original role model that I had. And I was just so grateful to have her lead the way for me.
I love it. I love it. I'm sure you have a lot of stories throughout the years of like data I don't know, breakthroughs
Of
with
course, of
folks. Yeah, so
course.
we're going to talk about that, right? Like when what happens with resistance to data, and how do we actually like create have connection around it. So um I first want to talk about why, in all your experience, what have you seen the reasons why teachers and coaches and school leaders are stressed out around data?
Yeah, there's several reasons why that occurs. And the first one is they're not getting the results that they want.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
it's just an immediate, I'm a failure, I'm not doing well. So, and that's difficult because you don't need to tell people they're not doing well. If they see it in the data, they already know it.
Mhm.
And that just creates all kinds of stress. The
Mhm.
other thing I see is data overwhelm. Everybody wants to give everybody everything, and it's not helpful. It's there's too much that they're trying to do, and it creates a time overwhelm, a data overwhelm. So now I'm stressed out because I can't change it. I'm stressed out because I can't do it all. I'm trying to be perfect. And then that last part is, I call it's a lack of data ownership.
Mhm.
They don't really own the data they can make an impact for it. It's somebody else's problem, or they like to blame it on something else rather than just take responsibility for it and shift to move it.
Mhm.
And that's because data is so threatening,
Mhm.
and they're feeling that threatening kind of feeling.
Mhm. Yeah, it's so interesting. You and I were talking earlier about, while data is never personal, it can feel very personal for people that just want to do a good job, right? And when we have
Exactly.
these like good intentions, right? I want to do a good job, and there's numbers in front of me, and my interpretation of them is could be I'm a bad teacher, right? Or there's something bad about this, and that can feel really uncomfortable.
Yes, yes. And I know I'm a believer that most people got into that's in education want to make a difference and they
For
want
sure.
to do their best.
Hmm.
And so if they're not getting those results, they just don't know how. So
Hmm.
how are we helping them to shift that to get the results that they want?
Yeah, 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 exactly. No, I love that. Was it three O's? It was over data overwhelm, data
Um,
ownership.
ownership. And then, yeah, I guess I haven't thought about, oh, but the other one was not getting results.
Oh,
So maybe I should
we
figure out
can figure
another
it
O
out. I
for
told
that.
you I love alliteration. We're gonna figure this out, Deborah.
There you
All
go.
right. So, when they are lacking that ownership, what do you see happens? You're going into these schools and districts working with folks, right? They're lacking ownership. They're blaming someone else. It's not my fault, right? It's someone
Right,
else's
right.
fault. Um, what um what happens? What's the impact of them being that way?
Well, the big impact, and it's the blaming, is the climate issue that occurs.
Hmm.
It's just not comfortable to be there when you're always blaming somebody else and it's somebody else's fault. And there's just I don't know how to say it, but when you walk on campus, there's just a climate there that's so negative, it's
Hmm.
hard to even cut through. And I can't even imagine what it would be like to try to work there every day if
Hmm.
there's that negative climate. And so part of it is, it's taking on, it's my fault, and I didn't do this right and I didn't do that right and I can never please people. And so then now it's her fault because she's not doing this for me and the leader's not doing this for me. And so everybody's blaming everybody else. And then it gets down to it's the kid's fault because if the kids
Hmm.
only had this. So it's just there's just a climate that you can't change it. And when
Hmm.
you can't change it, then there's a helpless feeling.
Hmm.
And then the whole cycle starts over again. I'm feeling bad about myself. I can't
Hmm.
change things. I'm feeling helpless. And
Hmm.
it just goes on from there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think about, when you said helpless, that really like struck me because it's and hopeless. Did you say helpless or
Mhm.
hopeless?
It said helpless, but it's
Helpless.
hopeless
Okay.
too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's interesting. My brain, I think, heard both of those words. But and it's just so it's feeling that's like a really awful feeling to feel helpless, to feel like this thing is happening to me and I can't do anything about it. And in psychological terms, it's called an external locus of control. When
Hmm.
we put right our sense of control outside of us, that whatever happens to me is I don't know, that the things outside of me control how I feel about my life
Right,
versus inside of me.
right, right. And it's a difficult place to be. It's
It
a hard
is.
place to be.
And
And
I
data
think
triggers that.
for sure,
If
for
it's not
sure,
done
data
shared
does.
appropriately, it really does
Mhm.
trigger that.
For sure, for sure. And I want to talk about first before we talk about how to effectively work with teachers around data. I want to talk about some non-examples. I'm a huge fan of non-examples. Like, what
Hmm.
what does it look like to ineffectively? What have you seen when folks ineffectively work with data with each other? They take out the data. They're in a PLC. They're in some kind of meeting. What do
Right.
ineffective practices look like?
Well, part of it is here's the data, fix it.
Mhm.
Well, if they knew how to fix it, they would. So, and it's not sometimes as direct as that, but
Mhm.
it's here's the data. We didn't hit the mark. What do we got to do about it? And they still don't know what to do about it.
Mhm.
So they internalize, let's fix it. And
Mhm.
I think that's part of it is people aren't trained how to use data properly. So if
Mhm.
they don't receive that proper training, then they don't look at it right. The
Mhm.
other piece is they're giving them all the data and it's like, I can't do all this. It's too
Mhm.
much. It's just
Mhm.
total overwhelm. And
Yeah.
so that's part of the issue. And I've worked in schools where they're so stressed out about the data. And I'm like, why are you sharing all this? Well, because it's here. But is it
Mhm.
making an impact? No. So it's getting them to see that they don't need all of that data,
Mhm.
honing that down, and then training them on how to really look at the data. And a big piece of it is each one of these numbers represents a student, and it's going to help us diagnose what these kids need.
Mhm. Yeah. And you and I were talking earlier about some non-examples that I've seen is when a coach is experiencing resistance or pushback or defensiveness from a teacher around data, the coach shows up in a whatever PLC and some kind of coaching meeting, shows the teacher the data.
Uh-huh.
Teacher gets defensive, is helpless, so blames whatever they say, right? They have some form of resistance around the data. And a lot of times the thinking is, well, it's not personal. We just got to stick to the numbers. We just got to stay, just focus on the numbers. And the fact is, no matter how much, so there's two parts of our brains here, the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. And so our prefrontal cortex is the part that can understand data. It
Mhm.
speaks logic and critical thinking and problem solving. Our amygdala is what gets triggered when we feel threatened. If I feel like to protect myself, right? My amygdala comes and takes charge. It's like, we're going to protect ourselves. We're going to survive this experience, this circumstance, right? Our
Exactly.
amygdala does not speak data. It
No,
doesn't
no,
understand numbers. It's emotional and it is surviving this. And data has nothing to do with survival.
exactly. And then it's all about that fight or flight. So now I'm either going to
For
fight
sure.
back or I'm going to run from it.
For
And
sure. Or freeze.
or freeze, exactly.
Or have you heard of fawn? Fawn is
Oh
the fourth
yes,
one.
yes, that happens
Oh,
too.
it's
So it's
so I
all
think, yeah, I think that's actually fawning is really huge in schools, the people pleasing. Right?
yes,
So it's
yes.
it's a stress response to people please. And so I actually think we see a lot of fawning in schools and don't realize that people are stressed out when they are just being so nice about everything.
Well, and some of it is, and I don't know a better way to say it, is the dog and pony show. When you're in
Mhm.
there, I'm going to give you the show you want to see, and I'm going
Mhm.
to,
Mhm.
show you what you want, and
Mhm.
you're pleased with me now. But
Mhm.
then I'm going to turn around and go back and do what I think works. And so it's all kind of mixed up together.
And it's a survival strategy. We're all kind of surviving
Yes,
each other, right?
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
it's wild, to think, anyway, I think a theme within this conversation, even just between you and me, is while data is numbers and logical, right? And we can analyze it, it triggers many times the opposite. It triggers emotion and survival and a lot of irrational thoughts, right? And so when we are working with data, and tell me if you have any other thoughts around this, I feel like you and I are saying we need to be with both. We need to be with the logic and the emotions around it.
Exactly. And you need to be aware of that. But when
Mhm.
you mention logic, I always like to share this story because people assume that when you give somebody data, that they're going to act in a logical manner. There's
Mhm.
just an assumption there.
Yes.
And I like to tell people it's not logical. And I'll give you an example. I'm going to give you a piece of data, the weather. It's 61 degrees outside.
Yeah.
Now, my husband's family is from Buffalo, New York. And
Mhm.
so, in the winter, it's below zero. They're socked with a bunch of snow. Can you imagine what they're saying at 61 degrees?
Right, right.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I can't wait. It's so warm. I've lived in Arizona most of my life, 61 degrees. What am I saying? It's
Mhm.
freezing, it's cold. The
Mhm.
data
Mhm.
did not change, but the
Mhm.
context and the experiences we
Mhm.
bring to the data, that's
Mhm.
what impacts our logic and our decision making and our interpretation of data. And unless I'm aware of all those feelings and what people are bringing, then
Mhm.
you're going to you could possibly have a struggle and fight and resistance.
For sure. And I love how you said context. Like the context in which we look at data is really important. There's not just one way we do it, or it's not absent of it. It's one of those I think things that people don't acknowledge that's even there because it's invisible. But
Hmm.
the context, it's how it's the what's the word for context? That's funny. I always just use that word. But it's the kind of environment around how we are actually having this conversation.
Yes, and it surrounds how I interpret the data
For
and the
sure. For
feelings I
sure.
bring to that data, my experiences.
Yeah.
And I
Mhm.
like to tell people when you're working with staff, are you asking a lot of questions and not in a like why you're doing this, but more tell me about why you believe that and tell me
Mhm.
about why this is happening and why you think
Mm.
that. So you're
Yeah.
getting at some of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Okay, so I want to go into it. You have this like data framework. I'm excited for you to share about it. How do you help coaches and leaders better utilize data with teachers to do it effectively?
So my data framework came out of just all the work I've done in school. So it's
Mhm.
just personal experience. And one of the things that I define them as 4 data steps. and it's actually based on the word data:
Mhm.
define, analyze, transform, and achieve. And the steps are the same in every school. How fast you move through the steps is really school dependent. And again, that depends on their experiences, their training, their context. And so that's where I begin. And so we start at step one. And the problem is when people are trying to change their data, they start at step one and they want to be up at step 10 like
Mhm.
tomorrow.
Mhm.
And when you're going up a flight of stairs and you try to take one step from 1 to 10, what happens? You're
Mhm.
teetering, you're a little off, you could fall and make things worse. And so I try to help people just work through things one step at a time. And again, the speed makes a difference. And so as we start looking at that first step, define, part of it is your goal. Now, most schools I'm in have goals. They're filed away in some school improvement plan. Not everybody knows the goal. And so define is deeper than the goal. It's what are the gauges that we're using to measure the goal? And for teachers, they need classroom performance data. For leaders, they look at the overall proficiency data. So really looking at in that define step, defining the gauges, what data pieces do we need to see overall as a school? And then what data do teachers need to make an impact on it? And I worked with the school, they had a goal, they shared the goal, they brought in a new program, they saw a little bit of a bump that first year, and then all of a sudden they did what I call flatline. Their
Mhm.
results didn't change. And so as I went in and I started talking to them, they didn't have these data pieces in terms of what they were monitoring. So they didn't know if they hit the mark or not before any big assessment or before any test. They were doing the program, they were teaching the program, but as we got into the analyze phase, they were teaching program. They
Mhm.
weren't teaching kids. They
Mhm.
weren't teaching how kids were responding. And
Mhm.
so their data just stopped because they were going through all the motions, but they weren't connecting their emotions to what kids needed. And
Mhm.
so that
Mhm.
defined step was really about trying to help them figure out, what are the gauges in the classroom that we should be monitoring to get them ready for that next piece that we're going to assess and
I
lining
love
up.
I love this. I want to say something about this because I it just really occurred to me just around numbers, and the question, it's funny, I asked myself this question around because I have a business, you have a business, right? And so, where do we put our attention, right? What you put your attention on grows. And when we have all of these numbers and data, and there's qualitative in terms of and in addition to quantitative, right? So yeah, we have some, they took an assessment and now we have some numbers, right? There's also anecdotal data that we have at our fingertips
Exactly.
as well, right? And I think one of the things you're really saying, which is so important, I just want to underline is where knowing intentionally, sorry, knowing where to intentionally put our attention. What
Yes.
numbers or what data, qualitative or quantitative, are we actually going to be looking at to achieve our goal, right?
And earlier I mentioned the focus on students. So
Mhm.
really looking at when I do this certain instructional piece, how are the kids responding? And
Mhm.
it's really not about teacher, what you're doing wrong and how you're shifting this data. It's about, well, what are the kids showing us they need? What do
Mhm.
we need to do to diagnose what's going on with them? And it
Mhm.
just really shifts everything. I like to say teaching, instead of teaching program, collecting numbers, just using data, we're
Mhm.
teaching kids.
Mhm.
And when you go into that next step, the analyze step, people often look at negative root causes and things that are wrong. And for me, I start with the positive. There are things that are doing well. And in most schools, and it may only be a handful, it may only be one or two, there's always teachers that are doing the right thing. So,
Mhm.
what are they doing to make that impact? And
Mhm.
when we look at those positive things, every teacher, and there might be an anomaly here or there, but
Mhm.
every teacher that's making an impact knows their kids.
Mhm.
They know what their kids need. They know how to diagnose them. They know how to intervene instructionally,
Mhm.
and things are just moving forward for them. And
Mhm.
so it's helping the rest of the teachers that are struggling with that area, doing everything you're focusing on. You're focusing on the training. You're focusing on this program, but they're still not getting in the result because no one's really taught them how to really look at this training, look at these interventions and how to connect them to students and what we need to do differently.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, no, I love it. I love, I love what you said, and I kind of want to broaden it a little bit. You said, everyone's doing things well, right? If someone was doing zero things well, I would imagine they'd be actively detrimental and probably wouldn't have a job, right? So
Exactly.
everyone is doing things well. I was a while ago, I was working with a teacher, and all she wanted to do was tell me how good she was. She would take 45 minutes of our coaching time and tell me how good she was and how smart her kids were. And like everyone was, it was like lecture style. Like all she did was lecture. Like I know things were not going well. Right. And it took a while to even get any data. I got her using exit tickets. And it
Hmm.
was like, we're going to get some, and she actually data transformed her classroom.
Yes.
And it wasn't like I didn't say anything inauthentic. I honestly didn't tell. I wasn't like, you're doing so great. You are a great teacher. Like I didn't say that. I built trust with her. And I
Yes.
found common
Yes.
ground and things that we could agree on. And it finally was like, hey, can we just try this little thing? And and what I love, I think data really has the power to transform classrooms. Um, ev- how do I say this? Like, even if the just having the data present has the opportunity to transform.
It does if it's used properly, because remember
Yes.
what we said before, if it's not used properly, then it just kind of
Yes.
goes in the negative direction. And that's
Yeah.
that step 3. So you have your goal, you've analyzed it, you've
Mhm,
identified your root causes, and then you really get into transformation.
mhm,
And I worked with another school where the principal went in, and as she began to look at her root causes, she really noticed a mindset issue. And the mindset was mediocrity was all we're going to get. This is the
mhm,
best we're going to be able to do,
mhm,
because of these kids here in this environment or whatever the reason is. But in
mhm,
that particular site, and that school when she started was an underperforming school.
mhm,
So as she built relationships and she built positive relationships, and the coach worked right alongside with her, they were
mhm,
both saying the same message, saying the same thing. She began to look at the data, and I loved her mantra: no judgment, just analysis.
mhm,
No judgment, just analysis. What is the data
mhm,
telling we need to do differently? And as she
mhm,
began to build relationships and they started looking at it, and the teacher felt confident that, okay, this is what it's telling me, what I can tell you to do, then they began to recognize, well, we need a different program, or we don't know how to teach this specific element.
mhm,
Brought in that program. Again, they asked for it, so it was very welcomed. The coach went right alongside with them, and the whole thing transformed. And they went from underperforming to highly performing within 3 to 4 years,
mhm,
because they grabbed hold of the data, they looked at it properly, and then they reinforced all those beliefs around, supporting those teachers with that. And the transformation happened. And that's where I see that in the transform. But if you don't analyze your root causes and really get into the right gauges, then how are you going to be transformative? So that's
mhm,
where they jump ahead to, let's go have a PLC and have all this data, but they've
mhm,
skipped all the parts before that. And so things kind of get out of whack again.
mhm,
And the transformation process, where teachers are talking in data dialogues, where they're having PLCs, where they've been trained properly on how to talk about it. It's amazing to see what happens when schools really grab a hold of that.
Do you train people how to have data dialogues?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
That's
And I have a
fantastic.
book that's coming out where I actually have a bunch of questions, because it's not about assumptions and this is what the data is telling me. It's asking a lot of questions, taking the input of everybody at the table, because they
Mhm,
all bring strengths that they could add to that data.
mhm,
And now obviously there's some things that it's like, okay, well, maybe that's not the best thing,
mhm.
but you've got to, there's that massaging of that you're working with your coaches and your leaders to help them figure that out.
I love it. Can you give us a couple questions? Like, what are some questions that are asked to facilitate data dialogues?
Right, right. So like it depends on what level you're at. So if
Yeah.
I'm
Uh-huh.
at the top level at leadership,
Mhm,
what is this data telling me about what we see in our classrooms?
mhm,
And what's the proficiency level, and what's the growth level, and what's going on, and which classrooms are they really making a difference? So then
mm,
why are they making a difference there? What's going
mhm,
on there? And you might
mhm,
bring the teacher and say, what are you doing? What's
Mhm.
happening and what are
Mm.
you doing? Even though the principal, the coach may be in the room and see it, to
Mhm.
hear it from the teacher, what tell me about kids and what you're doing about kids. Other teachers
Mhm.
are hearing that.
Mhm.
It takes away from some of that threatening feel.
Mhm.
And so at the leadership level, it's really honing in on looking at all the evidence of the data and where we see the biggest impact. Now, at the classroom level, it might be questions like, okay, so and so didn't do well on this assessment. This student didn't do well. So, what
Mhm.
does this tell me about what this student knows? Well, this
Mm.
question tells me this student knows this standard or
Mhm.
this skill, but this
Mhm.
question tells me that this student doesn't know this piece. And
Mhm.
then, okay, so did we teach this piece? And if
Mhm.
the answer is yes, then did they hear it properly or did they have it in a way where they can really understand it? Or if the
Mhm.
answer is no, then we just add that piece in.
Yeah.
Total non-threatening, total you're doing something wrong. It's what
Yeah.
do we need to do so the kids understand it?
Yeah. Yeah. I was training a coach recently and I said I don't know if this term had ever come out of my mouth, but she pointed out that I said that after during our debrief and I asked her, we were talking about a teacher and I
Hmm.
asked her, I said, what does that behavior tell you about him?
Yes.
And she said, I've never been asked that. And and that struck me when you said, what does this data tell us about student learning, right?
Hmm.
And it's we can also get data around behavior as well, right? Like there's kind of
Yes,
that
yes, behavior
qualitative
data,
anecdotal. Yeah.
or what do you when you walk around? Sometimes
Hmm.
when teachers are teaching a lesson and they're circulating, they don't know what to look for. So what am
Mm.
I looking for when I circulate? So
Ooh,
actually
that's
doing the
good.
training lined up to where they're trying, what their objective is and what they're trying to teach.
I love that. What am I looking for when I'm circulating? We rarely talk about that. And that's all
Exactly.
aligned with the data, right? We talk about the big school goal. How is our data? What data are we paying attention to support that school goal? And then when we're in our classrooms, where's our attention on the kids to support that data that supports everything? That's really great. I like that you pointed
And
that
some
out.
of the transformation I've seen with coaches is we actually walk rooms and I'm like, I tell the coach, I don't want you to look at teachers. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's part of it. I want you to watch the kids. Tell me what you see that the kids are doing. And then we'll
Hmm.
have a conversation. Now, based on this behavior that the kid did, what was the teacher doing?
Hmm.
And it gives them a different feel, a different feedback. And when you're giving
Hmm.
teachers feedback about kids,
Hmm.
sometimes with coaching can go in there and they can model a lesson and the teacher can watch their kid,
Hmm.
or the teachers can teach the lesson and the coach can watch the students.
Yeah.
And when they're doing all of that, it just takes away from that threatening feel like, oh, I'm doing something wrong,
Hmm.
to what are we going to do differently for these kids?
Hmm.
And how are we going to help them and impact them? And then you have teachers saying, I don't know how to do that in a safe
Hmm.
environment. I need help,
Hmm.
which is much different than I'm going to come in and show you how to do this.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think one opportunity that data gives us is I call it gamifying it. And it's like
Yes,
we could
it does.
actually use data to gamify our student achievement. In other words, we could like, let me try this strategy, like playing a game. Let me see if that increases my chances of winning, right? And certainly these are humans. We're not winning anything besides like student success and happiness in life. But it can really kind of make it fun and just less what do you call that, just significant, like we're trying things, we have a goal and we're trying new things and we're going to see if it helps, and if that doesn't help we're going to try something else, and
Yes.
we just get this feedback via data, and I think it has a real opportunity for fun too.
It does, and when we're in there, we talk about themes on how to share what's some fun ways to get the kids involved in this.
Hmm.
What's some fun ways to help them own their data and own their
Hmm.
results and
Hmm.
how to chart. So it makes it fun for them too. So that's this whole climate of data ownership, that when you have
Hmm.
that ownership, then you can make an impact with data.
Hmm.
Then you can begin to be creative and have some of these fun activities that you can do around it. But when you're
Hmm.
threatened by it, you don't want to
Hmm.
have anything to do with it.
Right, of course, right. And for us as coaches and leaders to get
Yes.
trained in how to connect with and create safety around data. That is step one.
And the other big thing I teach is Here are the charts we're using and the questions we're going to do around those charts every single assessment.
Mhm,
We're
mhm,
not going to do this chart, this assessment, this chart, this assessment, all these questions here, then different questions until
mhm,
we get where we want to be because we've defined where we want it to be. We're going to ask the same things because that
mhm,
creates consistency, it creates
mhm,
calm,
mhm,
it people know what's coming
mhm,
and they're working toward that goal to try to make that impact and that difference.
mm. Quite a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people in education need or value, how do I say this? Value consistency and like
Well,
feel
and
very
it's
safe and
the way the
secure.
brain works. If I'm
Mhm,
getting different things every single month,
mhm,
it contributes to overwhelm and
mhm.
overload,
For sure. For sure.
especially
Yeah.
for a new teacher. It's like,
Oh
I
yeah.
can't do one more thing.
Yeah, exactly. Right, right,
Or a
right.
new
Every master
principal. I can't
something.
add on one more thing on my
Yeah.
plate.
Yeah. I love it. So, what else do you want to share? Is there anything else you want to share around how coaches and leaders can better support teachers with data?
Well, one of the things I like to teach in the transform area when we're talking about data is there's three things staff need to believe. They need to know that this will make a difference for kids.
Mhm.
They need to know I can do this and I can do it today, right
Mhm.
now.
Mhm.
So as I'm sharing the
Mhm.
data and as we're working with folks to share the data, also share, well, why is this going to make a difference?
Mhm.
What is this going to tell me that I can do differently to make a difference that I can walk out of here today? And I'm a believer in every meeting, they should be able to walk out the next day and
Mhm.
implement something that they've learned that can
Mhm.
make an impact. Otherwise, why are we even sharing it and wasting their time?
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
helping them set those meetings up like that is really important. The other thing I find is that the coaching expertise is critical.
Mhm.
And it's so important that the leaders just really help their coaches gain that extra expertise. I've been in schools that's been transformative. The leader and the coach are on the same page, they're sharing the same vision. But I've also been in schools where the coach is almost like an assistant. So instead of training, going the same trainings that teachers are, they're out doing something else for the leader,
Mhm.
and things aren't lined up. And in
Mhm.
those types of schools, the coaches are blaming, or they can't fix it, or they can't even feel like they can take charge of it. And then they're asked to do all these other things beside coaching.
Mhm.
And it just gets totally out of whack because they don't have the expertise and the experience to do what they need. So
Mhm.
it's not only just helping your teachers with the data, but it's helping the coaches understand.
Mhm.
Now, as a coach, these are some types of things that you can do with the data to
Mhm.
help teachers feel more at ease.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I think, yeah, and I call it the kitchen sink coach. It's just everything gets piled into the kitchen sink, all these different roles. That's like, not necessarily the role one was hired for, the other
Yes,
duties as assigned. So yeah,
exactly.
no, thank you for pointing that out. The vital importance of coaches getting trained and really, I think, kind of having both ends of it, right? Being able to have those leadership conversations with leaders as well as hearing what the how the teachers are being trained as well with data. Is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
yes, it is. And that's where things get into a problem because if people
Yeah.
aren't trained on both sides, and if time's an issue, because I hear that all the time, we don't have time, we don't have time. Well,
Yeah.
why don't you have time? Where are you putting your time? And
Yeah.
then that's when you discover that the coach is being asked to do all these other things. So when does she have time to get in the classroom? And how important is that to the leader? Is that what you want your coach to be? And
Mhm.
having those tough conversations sometimes with leaders. And the coaches that are aligned with their leaders and they're working together in the classrooms, that's where you see huge impacts.
I love that. Yeah, there's, I think you're really good at questions. I feel like you've said just a lot of really clear intentional questions during this episode, and I'm hoping those that are listening are writing them down because it's really great. Like you just said, where are you putting your attention? Like if we could leave, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here, but I think you have it right here. It seems like it's a part of your expertise. If you could leave folks listening to this episode with three questions to ask themselves
Mhm.
about around data, what would be those questions to
Well,
to help them move their schools forward?
right. Why are we collecting this data and what's it going to show us?
Mhm.
That's the first and foremost, because if
Mm,
you can't answer that,
mhm.
then you're wasting people's time.
Yeah.
And then the
Right.
next question is, okay, we have this data. It's almost like it's the diagnosis. What is this
Mm,
data telling me about what kids need? Or
mhm,
for leaders, what is this telling me about what the staff may need?
mhm,
Or what are different things? What is this telling me about what positive things are happening here? And are we celebrating those positive things?
mhm,
And
mhm,
do we have those positive things in place?
mhm,
So those are just a few.
mhm,
Like I said in my book, I have pages of different
mhm.
questions
Good,
because it's
good.
all around what those schools need. I wish I had the magic bullet and say, here's the one question you can ask and it's going to solve
Mhm,
everything. But it's really about what's going on in your site, in your school.
mhm,
But those are a few
mhm.
to kind of get them started.
That's really great. And I do want to end with that. One of my favorite of your questions is, where are we putting our attention? I think a
Yes.
general, like, after we start asking, like, what direction are we going in? Where are we putting our attention? And I think that's poignant in coaching relationships and leadership relationships around data and outside of data. Where are we putting our attention? Because whatever we put our attention on, it grows.
And there's a story I have to share because it just fits here. And I call be careful not to get caught up in this the grass is greener syndrome. And I share this with schools, and it looks something like, well, if we only had that over there, we could do this. If we only had those teachers or those kids, we could do this and we could
Mhm,
make this impact. And so in this, what I like to share with folks is the grass is not greener on the other side of the fence way over there. It's
mhm,
greener where it's watered. And
mhm.
so where are you putting your attention? Where are you watering your grass? And is it producing what you want it to do?
Really great. The grass is greener where it is watered. So, thank you so much, Deborah. This is really great information. I hope those of you listening got a lot out of this. So, Deborah, can you share with everyone, where can they find you and what kind of resources do you have available?
So they can go to my website at
Mhm.
debradurma.com, and my first name spelled Debradurma, so debradurma.com. I have a blog there that has some of the questions and some of the stories that I've written, and the book is coming out soon. That will be posted on the website. And I always like to offer to folks, it's hard to diagnose every single school in one of these conversations. So if they need a little bit of help, they can reach out and contact me. I'd be happy to talk with them and answer some of their questions specifically. And
That's
you can
really
do that
great.
on my website as well. Just fill out the little contact form and tell me what you need, and I'd be happy to talk with them.
Perfect. And I'll put your website in the show notes. So, if you just want to click on it, feel free to do that as well. So, Deborah, thank you so much again for sharing all of your awesome expertise around data.
Well, and thank you for having me here. It's been great to connect with you. I love the way that you're approaching coaching too. So thank you so much for all of that.
Thank you.